friends. Today's story is called Red Cedars and Grizzly Bears. Will you please locate the Atlantic Ocean for me? Atlantic Ocean is right here. What about the Appalachian Mountains? Right there. Mississippi River. Right here. What about the Rocky Mountains? Over here. What about the Louisiana Purchase? It's going to be all that land in between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains, right? This big chunk of land. Now, what about the Pacific Ocean? Over there. And the Missouri River? Yes, it connects to the Mississippi River in St. Louis, and it goes west towards the Rocky Mountains. So, I want you to describe where Lewis and Clark spent the winter last read aloud. And who joined their group? They spent the winter with the Mandan people, and they hired Sacagawea as a translator and a guide, right? What were the two tasks that Lewis and Clark had accomplished or done so far? They made friends with the Native Americans, the Yankton Sioux, and the Teton Sioux, and the Mandans, and the Hidatses, and they encountered and made notes about the prairie dogs, and the pronghorn antelope, and the bison, and other plants and animals. And they sent some of those home back east with part of the Corps of Discovery, and they were going to take those samples back to President Jefferson, right? So today, Lewis and Clark are going to encounter more new things on their expedition. I would like for you to listen carefully to find out what new things Lewis and Clark encounter and how they're going to keep track of what they encounter. After Lewis and Clark sent some of the team back east with reports and scientific samples for President Jefferson, the captains and the rest of the crew continued west. They rowed in 2 of their original Pigrews, plus 6 new canoes made from hollowed-out trees. These canoes, about 30 feet long and 3 feet wide, were hard to balance. More than once, as the men were getting used to them, the canoes overturned in mid-river, forcing the men to fish out wet supplies before going on. So the men had to get the supplies out of the water because the boats had flipped over in the water and the supplies fell out. Despite this, Lewis wrote in his journal that the men were happy and healthy. Soon, they left behind the flat plains and entered hilly land. Now, the Missouri River became more difficult to travel. Forests of red cedars lined the banks of the river. These beautiful trees were so important to the Native Americans of the area that some Native Americans called themselves the people of the red cedar, performing special ceremonies before chopping down the huge evergreens. Evergreen trees, they stay green all year long, okay? They kind of look like your Christmas trees. Lewis and Clark knew it would be impossible to take an entire tree back with them because of its gigantic size, almost 200 feet above the ground. That's as tall as a 20-story building. Nevertheless, the tree was so important to the lives of the Native Americans that they knew they must gather samples and record its many uses. I got the hiccups, guys. They knew they had to write down information about the tree's many uses in order to remember and share it. They drew pictures and collected branches, cones, and seeds. As they learned more about the western red cedar from the Native Americans in the area, both Lewis and Clark wrote about the importance of the western red cedar in their journals. The people and animals of the Northwest relied upon the tree for their existence or in order to survive. Native Americans used the bark of the tree to weave mats, baskets, and clothing, and used the wood to build canoes. Elk ate the leaves and the shoots of the enormous tree. Bears hibernated or slept through the winter in hollow cedar logs. The men heard often of bears called grizzly bears that made their homes in hollowed-out logs of cedars. So, as they made their way up the Missouri, William Clark warned, "Keep a sharp eye out for grizzly bears." Do you see the grizzly bear in this picture? Which one's the grizzly bear? Yeah. So, when he says keep a sharp eye out for grizzly bears, he just means be aware and alert in case a grizzly bear is around. One of the hunters said, "Don't worry, Captain. We've seen plenty of bears before back in Kentucky." Black bears, yes. Grizzly bears, no. From what I hear, it's like the difference between a house cat and a lion. Does Captain Clark think that grizzly bears are like black bears? What do you think? All right. One day, Lewis and another man were out hunting along the riverbank. Suddenly, they saw two giant grizzly bears up ahead. The bears rose up on their hind legs, up and up, until they stood 8 feet tall. Then, roaring, the bears charged. Raising their rifles and taking careful aim, Lewis and his companion, or friend, shot one bear, but the other one kept coming right at them with frightening speed. "Run!" shouted Lewis, and the two men turned, took aim, and fired at the same instant. The loud bang was followed by a tense moment as the bear suddenly stopped running. It held still for a moment, and then it toppled over, or fell forward. Only when they were sure that the grizzly bear was dead did Lewis and his companion carefully approach the animal. Lewis later wrote in his journal that the bear weighed between 500 and 600 pounds, and it was 8.5 feet tall. That's taller than 2 first graders, one standing on top of the other. After this frightening chase, Lewis told the whole party, "From now on, we must always move about and do even the simplest actions in parties or groups of 2 or more. One man alone going up against a grizzly would not stand a chance." All right, guys, comprehension time. Okay, which task or tasks did Lewis and Clark accomplish in their story today? They discovered a new plant and a new animal, right? They talked about the red cedars, and they saw a grizzly bear. What was one plant that Lewis and Clark discovered? The red cedar. Can you describe it? What does it look like? Yeah, it's very tall, and because it's an evergreen, it stays green all year long. And it's got, instead of like leaves that you would see on the trees outside, they have like little needles, kind of like in your Christmas trees. Could Lewis and Clark bring a red cedar back with them? No. Why not? Yeah, it was way too big. So what did they decide to do instead? Instead, they decided to draw pictures and collect cones and branches. All right, what was the animal that Lewis and Clark discovered? The grizzly bear. Can you point to which of these bears is the grizzly bear? This one, that's right. So, how are the grizzly bear and the black bear the same? They're both bears and they both live in the wild, right? How are they different? The black bear is smaller and it's black, and the grizzly bear is brown and much bigger. Also, Clark explained that he thought the grizzly bear was much more dangerous and wild than the black bear. Why did Lewis tell the group that they must do things in parties of 2 or more? He said that because if they were by themselves and they came across a grizzly bear, they were they were in a lot more danger, right? He said that it would be too hard for one man to stand up to a grizzly bear. They'd need at least two. Which of the things that Lewis and Clark encountered, the grizzly bear or the red cedar tree, was more important? Why? That's a question that you might have different answers than each other, and that's okay. All right, word work. In the read aloud you heard, nevertheless, the western red cedar was so important to the lives of the Native Americans that Lewis and Clark knew they must gather samples and record its many uses. I want you to say the word record with me. You can whisper voice it, mouse voice it, grandpa voice it, whatever. Record. When you record something, you're writing down information in order to remember it or share it, okay? I'm going to use it in a sentence now. Mia recorded how many cars passed her house in 1 hour. I want you to pretend that you were on the expedition with Lewis and Clark. What kinds of things would you record on the expedition? And I want you to use the word record in your answer. What's the word we've been talking about? Record. And when you record something, that means you're writing down information in order to remember it or share it. All right, guys, go check out your assignment. Steer clear of the grizzly bears. Bye.